Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please be sure to give this video a like and to check out my channel to see more content like that and subscribe if you would like. And today I am bringing another episode of quick movie reviews. I have seen several different movies over the past couple of months and none of them were quite interesting enough for me to dedicate a full review to them. Either that or I just took too long to really do a full review of them. And now it just makes more sense to just compile my thoughts on all of them together. As with all my episodes of quick reviews, I will say as much or as little as I feel like the movie needs to be said about, and I won't try to waste your time too much, but if I do have more to say about a particular movie, I will do so. But nevertheless, let's not waste any more time, and let's get into the first movie I will be discussing on the docket. So first up on the list is from director Osgood Perkins, who made one of my favorite horror movies of last year, Longlegs. And this year he is bringing a movie based on a short story from Stephen King called The Monkey. Now, I know what a lot of people have already said about this, the fact that Stephen King movies are maybe a little bit oversaturated and overdone at this point. We have so many of them and they're not necessarily needed as much anymore, but at the same time, I was still interested in this movie. I thought it was interesting to see Osgood Perkins attempting a movie like this because this movie and its genre of horror, specifically the fact that it is a comedy horror, is very different from what you typically get out of Perkins. He typically makes very atmospheric, much more serious horror. I do think what I appreciate the most about The Monkey is that it doesn't ever take itself too seriously. It does play into its horror comedy pretty well, and that's especially admirable coming from a director who hasn't really dipped his foot into this genre in his movie-making career. This is, like I said, a very different movie for him. But I do generally think what works best about this movie is its comedy. I do think there are places where it is actually quite funny, and I like that when the movie seems to be building up a scare, it suddenly just sort of does this almost sitcom-like cut away to a pretty funny gag, admittedly, and even the deaths in the movie, some of them are actually pretty funny because of how cartoonishly gory they are, and that was obviously intentional on the movie's part. I also think that generally the performances in the movie were fine. I actually think the child actor who played the younger version of the twin brothers in this movie may have been the highlight in some ways. In fact, this is sort of the same as the It movies, where I like the stuff with the kids in the movie, the plotline that follows the kids, more than I do the plotline that follows the adult versions of themselves. I don't know what it is, but it seems like Stephen King can write younger character stories better than he can the adult versions of the stories, and this is another case of that, I feel like. When it's revolving around the adult versions of these characters in the story, when they make the dumb decisions, it is a little bit more frustrating in my opinion, and it doesn't work as well as I would prefer it to, I think. But nevertheless, I do think that there is a lot good to write home about this movie in terms of the comedy and in terms of at least some of the gore. I do really think that especially the cold open scene was very effective in establishing how brutal this killing monkey was going to be. And I do think that there were some pretty fun kills in here. My main complaint about the gore aspect is that some of it does look a little bit obvious CGI. I also do feel that maybe some of the gore could have been done a little bit more creatively. Some of it just felt like a little bit random and out of nowhere, and they don't really even give you time to necessarily dwell on it or to fully register it before they cut to the next thing. The movie does feel like it moves pretty quickly, I think, and there's places where I think it could have stayed in the moment and done a little bit more with certain parts of the film, but nevertheless, that was something that I did notice about the movie that was a slight critique of mine. I think the monkey itself is actually pretty creepy in this movie. Anytime it did pop up, the way that Osgood framed it and filmed it did make it feel like a very unsettling entity, and whenever it was on screen, you were very worried about what was going to happen. It did put me on edge, and I did like those moments of the movie. There are also some parts of this movie that I do feel like cheapen it a little bit, and yeah, the movie not taking itself seriously is both a blessing and a curse. I do think the funny parts of this movie do end up being some of its best, but it does make the horror not feel as scary as it could be, because the moments with the monkey and where it is feeling admittedly unsettling are immediately sort of contradicted by these very silly moments to where the horror does feel a little bit cheapened. Even though Theo James was doing a fine enough job, I guess, he wasn't necessarily as interesting as our child actors, and I just didn't find his character super interesting to follow along with. Nor did I find him to be super sympathetic, or really, I didn't really have a reason to root for him, I feel like. But there are still some decent aspects of this movie. It's not a total loss. I just do think that when you add up the sum of its parts together, it comes across as more of an okay horror movie than anything else. An okay comedy horror movie at that. There isn't really much else to say about it besides it's just fine for what it does. And I do think it is one of Osgood Perkins' weaker entries, certainly not as bad as Gretel and Hansel. I do think this movie has a lot more going for it, but it is pretty standard fare, and it's not necessarily something that's going to absolutely wow you as you think about it more after you leave the theater. Fine for what it is, a decent enough time, but I was hoping for a little bit more out of it. Solid 3 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up is a Marvel movie I was actually sort of hopeful for because I really like the trailers for it, and that is Captain America: Brave New World. I would say that out of the MCU, the consistently best series at least, has been the Captain America series. I have liked to loved pretty much every Captain America movie that has come out. Unfortunately, that trend ends with this Captain America movie. Now, it's not as bad as some of the critics are painting it out to be, and even some audience members are painting it out to be, but it is unfortunately a much more mid-tier Marvel movie than I was hoping for. In fact, it feels like the most mid-tier of mid-tier Marvel movies you could get, which is a real shame coming out of the Captain America series, which, like I said, I do think, along with the Guardians of the Galaxy series, is one of the best pieces of work that the Marvel Universe has done. I think there's several reasons for that. Now, one of them, in my opinion, is not really Sam Wilson as Captain America. I actually think he is a fine enough Captain America. I know a lot of people didn't like that they transferred it to a new person, but they are bringing in inevitably a new generation of superheroes, and admittedly, I don't know if it's necessary because I do feel like Marvel has not been as interesting following Endgame, but if they were going to give it to anyone, it did make sense for it to be Sam Wilson, and I do think I generally like Sam Wilson as Captain America. The biggest problem is that the movie doesn't really feel like it fits him that well. He feels like a bit of an afterthought in many ways, as a lot of the plot does not really revolve around him. He doesn't really impact the plot a whole lot. He's just sort of searching around and discovering things. The resolution of the plot, it doesn't feel like it's particularly important to him. Instead, a lot of the main weight of the plot revolves around Harrison Ford's character, Thaddeus, the President of the United States, who is definitely a very flawed character intentionally in the movie. A bit of an anti-hero, you could say. He has lost his relationship with his daughter for various reasons, and he has a bit of a weird connection to the MCU that you will discover as you're watching the movie. And it is very perplexing, the route this movie takes, where essentially, without spoiling too much what it's about, this movie is more a almost soft sequel to the original Incredible Hulk movie from the MCU than any Captain America movie. Man, I wish the movie had followed more of what I was hoping it was going to be based from the trailer, more of a political thriller, and the movie certainly tries to include some intrigue in it in terms of this mystery of why was the president shot by this person that Sam Wilson views as a mentor, and is this person really guilty, or is there something deeper going on? But even though the plot is trying to be as convoluted as possible, and admittedly in places it is pretty convoluted because of the sheer amount of different chess pieces being played, but they're being played so clumsily, Nevertheless, the solution is actually pretty obvious and doesn't feel all that surprising when it's revealed what's really going on. And even when it is revealed what's going on, the impact just feels very hollow because it brings back a certain character from an earlier Marvel movie that I feel like not many people truly care about in terms of Marvel villains, and he's not particularly compelling here, even though he's played by a very good actor. I just didn't really care for the character here. I do feel like Marvel consistently has a problem with making uncompelling villains, but this one might exacerbate that issue more than some other Marvel movies because of the sheer amount of villains it has. It has one too many, either characters that are villains or ones that are sort of anti-heroes, like Giancarlo Esposito as Sidewinder. Giancarlo is a great actor. I love him in what he does, but it seems like he's just playing literally his typecast here, and they don't really do much with him, and he feels like a red herring at the end of the day. And Harrison Ford's character, Thaddeus the President, he's also sort of built up to be a sort of faux villain, but even he is once again a bit of a misdirect here. And while I do feel frustrated that so many characters are a misdirect, I do have to say I did like Harrison Ford's character in this movie, and I think a lot of that does have to do with how well Harrison Ford played the character. He did a great job with him, and I do think he was a highlight of the movie. He put a lot of weight behind his character, and he was the only one I really ended up caring about at the end of the day, out of a lot of the main cast. I also did find Carl Lumbly as Isaiah Bradley, the character who originally gets put in prison because it looks like he shot the president of his own will, but there's clearly something else going on. I found him to be a very sympathetic character, and there's a lot of weight put into him that I really appreciated. I just wish we had seen a little bit more of him. But what we really get out of this movie is a bit of a clumsily put together political thriller that feels like a huge afterthought, especially when you compare it to the much better political and spy thriller that you get in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I think that Anthony Mackie's fine as Sam Wilson. I just feel like they don't give him much to do. And Danny Ramirez as his Falcon, as his protege, I don't know, he just feels like a bit of an afterthought to me. I don't feel like they did much with him, and he didn't really intrigue me that much. The only aspect of the movie that worked almost completely for me was Harrison Ford's character arc that he went on. I did like Thaddeus Ross. I found him to be pretty interesting, and yeah, I think it made sense why they emphasized so much story around him. This movie is just very mid-tier Marvel, okay action, ruined by some cheap CGI that can look pretty bad in places, but that's sort of par for the course for a lot of Marvel movies at this point. Performances that are fine but not particularly remarkable, and a perplexing focus on making a soft Incredible Hulk sequel that didn't really feel like something that anybody wanted. I'm going to give this a light 2.5 out of 5 stars. I was a bit disappointed by this one, I'll have to be honest. Next up is a movie that I don't have much to say about at all, and that is the film Flight Risk. This, I just sort of watched this on a whim because I was bored one day, and this movie was out to watch, so I checked it out, and yeah, it did absolutely nothing for me. Just a boring action movie directed by Mel Gibson, and really that's the only interesting thing about it, I think. It was very dull, and the trailer sort of deceived you into thinking that Mark Wahlberg's character Daryl would be playing a bigger role in it, but he really doesn't, and when he does play a role in the movie, it feels so cartoonish and over the top. I think the only character I really liked here was Michelle Dockery as Madeline. She at least had some stuff going on. Topher Grace was also okay as Winston, I suppose, but he just played his character just so generically, I feel like, just this sort of criminal who was being arrested, but who was very meek and very cowardly, and that's just essentially what his character was for the whole movie, I think. I didn't really feel like he had much of an arc going on. It's just not particularly interesting, and the majority of the movie is just them flying with a little bit of action to break up the stuff every once in a while, but it's not even very good action. And then the movie just sort of turns into an over-the-top mess at the end. I was just amazed at how silly it got when it was playing it pretty straightforward for the majority of the film. And it just makes it so unbelievable and so cartoonishly ridiculous that you just can't help but laugh. this movie was, at the end of the day, just kind of lame. I feel like this is one of my least favorite movies I've seen this year so far, and yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious why. The bad parts of it are just very front and center. 2 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up, I'm going to talk about the Apple TV Plus original, The Gorge, starring Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy. Pretty star-studded cast there. I was very interested in this one because I like both of these actors, and I was interested to see how they would pair up with each other. And yeah, I think this was pretty well done overall. Now, is it the most amazing action movie out there? No, I wouldn't say so. And in fact, I would actually say the action is the weaker part of this movie in some ways. I actually like the aspects more where it is a bit of a rom-com. I think what mainly does help is that the chemistry between Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy's characters are believable. Levi and Drasa are their names, and they both play characters who are very good at killing. And essentially, killing is all they know. That's something that they've done for their whole lives, and other than maybe a couple stray relationships here and there, they're both very lonely people. So when they meet each other, they're able to sort of become kindred spirits. But how they meet each other is rather unconventional, because both of them are from different sides of the world, and they're both assigned to guard this gorge from these towers. And they don't really know why they're guarding this gorge, beyond the fact that the creatures in it, they don't want to let them out. There's a lot of questions going on, but for at least the first part of the movie, they don't really seem to care much about that. Instead, they care more about building this relationship with one another. And I actually found that part of the movie to be pretty likable. I found them both to be fun characters, and there were also cute references to different other movies that they've been in, like Miles Teller's character playing the drums, which seems to be an obvious nod to him being in Whiplash, or Anya Taylor-Joy's character playing chess, which seems to be an obvious reference to her being in The Queen's Gambit. And when the characters do finally inevitably meet, I did like how they worked off each other. I thought they were fun characters, and I liked both of them pretty well. Anya Taylor-Joy's Russian accent as Drasa is maybe a little over-the-top feeling, and sometimes it feels a little inconsistent, but it was fine enough for what it was. And I did really like Miles Teller in this as Levi. I thought he was a really well-done character, and it was interesting to see his story unfold. Now, when the movie turns into a bit more of an action thriller, I did find it to be a little less interesting, but it still does have some aspects that work. I did find the creature designs of the creatures in the gorge to be pretty cool. I did like the characters sort of uncovering the secrets of the gorge and what was going on there, and while it isn't necessarily the most surprising thing in the world, it is interesting to watch them uncovering this mystery and deciding ultimately what to do about the gorge, as well as still being invested in the relationship at the end of the day over anything else. With all that in mind, I'm going to give this movie a solid 3 out of 5 stars. I think if you like action movies and you like rom-coms, then you might like this movie, as it's a pretty good marriage of the two concepts that I found to be pretty fun, if maybe a little bit standard in places. Next up, I'll talk about the third Paddington movie, entitled Paddington in Peru. I have found the first 2 Paddington movies to be absolutely delightful, with Paddington 2 in particular just being absolutely superb. Maybe one of the best movies that marries animation with live action, and does it in a way to where it doesn't feel like just incredibly hollow with pointless product placement or just feeling like a commercial. I do think that this movie is a pretty good follow-up to Paddington 2, although I do think that it is decidedly and most definitely the weakest of the trilogy. I do think this one feels a little bit more generic than the other two and how unique the other two were. This one has a more straightforward story of Paddington wanting to find his missing aunt and essentially discovering his family in the process. The theme that comes across about family versus found family is something that I could sort of see coming from a mile away, but I do have to remind myself that this movie is for kids, and for kids I think that theme will work. And it's not like the theme is poorly executed or anything. I do think it is established in a very nice way, and I think it feels very warm-hearted and very loving, just like the other Paddington movies do. I also do think that while this Paddington movie is pretty funny, it's not nearly as funny as the other two. The other two had some just really great gags in them that I found to be just absolutely hilarious and cleverly executed, whereas this one's gags aren't quite as funny, with the exception of the stuff that they do with the nun character played by Olivia Colman, the Reverend Mother. She is, by the way, just hysterical in this. I loved her character in this movie. What I love about the Paddington movies, and that remains to be the case for this one, is they take these theater-trained British actors and they put them into situations where they can be very silly and where they have to take some risks, and all of the actors embrace that and let themselves be silly. That goes for Hugh Bonneville as well as Mr. Brown. I have liked him in each of these movies. It's just so funny to see him transform from such a serious character like Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey to transforming to such a kooky character in Mr. Brown in the Paddington series. While I do miss Sally Hawkins, who originally played Mrs. Brown in the first two Paddington movies, I do think Emily Mortimer is a good replacement for her, and I think she does a good job at stepping her shoes into this character, and I found her to be fine enough in the role. Antonio Banderas is clearly having a lot of fun in this as the hunter. I found him to be delightful here. He played his character very cartoonish. It did remind me a bit of Puss in Boots from Shrek in a lot of places, and I think that was part of the reason why I liked it. But yeah, he was a lot of fun to watch and was probably the most fun element of the movie if I had to choose one. And Paddington continues to be a very likable character, just one that you can't help but like following along with and root for. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say about this movie. I think it is good for what it is. I think it is a good Paddington sequel. I just do think there's parts where it falls a little short compared to the other two movies, where the gags in this one feel a little more obvious and a little more just physical, whereas in the first two they were much more visually clever. In this one, not quite as much. And I do think that the plot feels a little bit more predictable here and ends in a place that may feel a little cliched even if it does work. But I did like this movie overall. Strong 3 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is the animated movie Dogman. I admittedly only saw this one on a whim. Once again, sort of like Flight Risk, this was not one I was necessarily interested in, but I just had some free time one day and just went to the movies to see it, and it was actually a pretty pleasant surprise. Now, this is based off Dave Pilkey's own series. He is the same guy who made the Captain Underpants series that I read when I was a kid. His animated style is so distinctive to how the visual style of Dave Pilkey is that it just feels wholly unique and wholly its own thing. I think that's a really cool aspect of the movie, and I think the best thing it has going for it. The animation is just gorgeously done, and proves that DreamWorks is on a really cool trajectory right now in terms of the animation they are doing. I love the comic book style of it, and the gags they do with the animation to add to the comedy is well done. Although some of the meta jokes can maybe be a little bit overdone, and like, oh, some of these characters know they're in a movie, or like these characters know that the plot is predictable in certain places, it nevertheless does work because of how the movie presents it. I think our main character, the Dogman himself, who never talks, is very fun to watch. They do a lot with his character, and I mean, they play around with the fact that he's a dog very well, but also that he is very clever and has some human aspects to him. And I think our villain, the cat, Petey the Cat, played by Pete Davidson, is maybe my favorite aspect of the movie. He is so cartoonishly over the top, but also has such a surprisingly sympathetic edge to him that I didn't necessarily see coming while I was watching the movie. And this movie also has a pretty emotive heart to it that I didn't see coming based off the trailers. It felt like more it was going to be the type of movie where it was just going to be a joke a minute and was going to be very light and move along. And there are definitely jokes a minute in this movie, but I think it's more than that. I think there's actually a good heart to this movie that makes it more than you might expect it to be, and I think that's why I liked it even more than I expected I would. Another big highlight of the movie was Lil Ray Howery as the chief. I mean, he was just so funny in this, and Lil Ray Howery continues to prove that he's not only a great actor, but a great voice actor. And I also found Ricky Gervais to be quite fun as Flippy, who turns out to be sort of the main villain of the movie, but not necessarily. You'll have to watch the movie to see what I mean. But he played his character appropriately cartoony and over the top, and yeah, I found his character to be fun to watch as well. If there were any flaw to this movie, I would say that it does almost move a little too quickly for its own good, so that you don't really have enough time to register and appreciate certain parts as I wish you would. And I do think that the movie is maybe trying to do a couple too many things in terms of the themes that it's balancing. I do think this was a very cute movie. I think it was a lot of fun, and I think that if you generally like animated movies with a lot of jokes in them and a lot of gags in them, then this one will work just well enough for you. Solid 3 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, before I end off this video, I did just want to briefly touch on a movie that came out last year, but I didn't really get to see until this year, and it was the Best Animated Oscar winner for 2024, and that is Flow. I mean, this movie is just incredible, and I can see why it won the Oscar. For as much as I liked the other animated nominations, and even loved ones like The Wild Robot, I do see why this one won the Oscar. It is just an impressive achievement. The movie is silent outside of the animal noises that the cat, dog, capybara, bird, other animals make, but outside of that, it is silent. You get the story that is going on because of how the animals are reacted to things and how well animated they are in terms of what they are doing. This movie just looks beautiful. It is very uniquely animated, a combination of sort of cartoonish and 3D and photorealistic animation that creates a very unique product that I haven't seen out of many animated movies, I feel like. I love in particular how the cat's eyes are animated. They just look so distinctive. And I mean, it's such a likable movie. I would be hard-pressed to find anything that I really dislike about it. The plot moves along at a good pace, and the journey is interesting to watch, and you're constantly intrigued because you aren't sure what's going to happen next, because it is a really cool mystery that unfolds really naturally. The water animation is gorgeous in this, some of the most gorgeous looking I've seen. There are so many shots that just stand out, like the night shots with the Aurora Borealis, or the sunset shots are just wonderful. All the animals are delightful. I mean, the cat was great. Just, the movie really embraced all the cat mannerisms. I thought the dog was delightful too. I mean, they just really nail the mannerisms of each animal really well and give them their own distinct personalities while not making it feel too cliched. It is a nearly pitch-perfect movie. If anything, I would have liked it to be a little bit longer, and I would have liked them to maybe extend the falling action a little more to make the impact be felt ever so slightly greater. But that is such a minor complaint that it almost feels like I'm nitpicking. This is a superb movie, and if I had seen it in last year in 2024, it would have almost certainly ranked in my top 10. Very strong 4.5 out of 5 stars. If you haven't seen this one, I highly recommend it. But yeah, that ends this episode of Quick Movie Reviews. What were your thoughts on any of the movies I talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.